Appointed by the Council of Medical Schemes to look into the allegations of racial profiling by Discovery, Medscheme and Gems have concluded the first 3 stages of its inquiry. The investigation panel received written representations and testimonies from unhappy Black and Indian medical practitioners. Now, this follows after a group who call themselves the Solutionist Thinkers came to our show earlier this year to break the silence on this alleged bullying, racial profiling and unfair auditing from medical aids. So from our Pretoria studios, we have Dr Zaid Kimmie. He's Section 59's Panel Investigator, to tell us more about this so far. Good to have you. Thanks very, very much for being with us here on the program.
Oh, good to be here.
How long now has the investigation been in duration for, and how is it going?
I think the investigation has been running since approximately May. And as you said, they finished the first round of submissions.
Yeah.
And I think have made, and I've made some preliminary submissions to them based on the findings that I was asked to investigate.
All right, so let's look at some of those findings. And I suppose the big question that needs to be asked right up front, have you found any evidence of racial bias and profiling?
Well, I suppose the short answer is yes.
Okay.
I'd like to say that the question proceeded in 2 parts. The first was to ask whether there was an explicit racial bias in the way that the investigation systems were being implemented. So that meant specifically, was there a smoking gun? Were people explicitly targeting or intentionally targeting Black practitioners in the way that they were implementing this fraud investigation system? And the answer to that was no.
Okay.
There appeared to be no explicit targeting.
No explicit
We could
targeting.
then follow that, yeah. No smoking gun. There was nothing in an algorithm, if you would, which said, if Black, do this. Well, the systems on the face of it appeared to be race neutral. The second part of the investigation then asked, irrespective of what the intent was there a difference in outcomes? So using the data provided by the schemes, was there a difference in outcomes with respect to the proportions investigated, whether you were Black or white, in principle? And in that component, we found that there was, in fact, a severe racial bias. That Black doctors, medical practitioners, were much more likely to be targeted and found guilty by the medical aids than white medical practitioners.
Okay, so these a lot of findings that have come out, and so a lot of the allegations that have come forward from some of these medical practitioners and also that group, the Solutionist Thinkers, are more than just allegations. They're actually proving from this first part of the investigation to actually be true to a certain extent. The aggrieved healthcare practitioners have said that Discovery, Medscheme and Gems were doing unfair audits on them and refused to pay their claims. So what were your findings on this?
I think we have to be clear that the findings that I've made for the panel talk only about those large-scale differences in outcomes. It does not say anything about any individual or any group of individuals' cases. The merits of those, of course, have to be judged based on the cases themselves. All we can say is that if you expected a certain proportion of Black practitioners to be identified as fraud, waste and abuse cases, in actual fact, the number identified is far higher than expected, and is so much far higher and so unlikely that we can, to all reasonable purposes, eliminate chance as an explanation. That there must be some mechanism, some relationship between the race of the practitioner and the outcome as determined by these medical schemes.
Yeah.
I should also make it clear that the data that we're using has been provided by the schemes themselves. So it's their own data with some additional analysis that we've been asked to perform.
If we look at, let's talk to the medical aids. Do they use surnames and geographic information to identify the race and ethnicity of healthcare practitioners?
No, I guess this would be one of the few cases in South Africa where the system itself, there's a system called the PCNS system. Every medical provider has a unique number, and that system does not capture the race of the practitioner. It just captures the name and a surname and an address and a speciality and banking details and the like. So part of the problem has been that the schemes and the administrators could legitimately claim not to know whether there was a bias in outcome because they did not know what the race of the practitioner was. And part of the conundrum we had to resolve was assigning a race to people based on their surname, and to do that in such a conservative way that we didn't create artificial results. But once we've completed that process, and I think the process is particularly robust, we're in a situation where I think the results are quite clear. That this bias has happened over an extended period, that it happened across all three of these parties that you mentioned, Discovery, Gems and Medscheme, and that it's not linked to a particular discipline, that it happens across a fairly broad range of disciplines.
Yeah. What have the medical aids actually said? I mean, what have been their arguments on this?
Their argument has been, I would say, essentially one, that they do not believe that they are racist and that they practice any racial profiling at all, which is the intent question. And the second part of their argument is that they are unaware of any difference in outcomes because they are unaware of the race of any practitioner. Because, as I said, this is simply not captured on any database. It's not listed anywhere. These are just names and numbers.
Yeah.
And so the argument has been, we don't know.
Which I suppose is expected. I mean, that would be the obvious response from the medical schemes. But just in terms of the Council of Medical Schemes, have you looked at their role in the situation, or is that something that'll perhaps follow in the next two segments of the investigation?
Yeah, as I said, at this stage, we've simply been able to settle the question of whether there is a bias.
Okay.
The next question is, how has that bias occurred and which particular parties are responsible? And that question is something that will be considered by the panel using additional evidence and submissions from the medical schemes themselves and potentially even from the Council for Medical Schemes. But that's we've settled the question of, is there a problem? The question now will be, how did it occur? Did it occur legitimately? Is it a natural outcome of certain processes? These questions I can't speculate on, but they will be for, I think, the medical schemes to answer and for the panel to make a determination about.
Yeah. So just as we wrap the interview in terms of timing, two more processes. The first segment has taken roughly 6 months. What are we looking at until this is all finalized?
I believe that the schemes will give their response and their evidence in January. And you'd have to speak to the panel, but I presume it will be 1 or 2 months after that they'll be able to wrap up and make a finding.
All right, let's leave it there. We thank you so much for updating us on all of this. Dr. Zaid Kimmie, the investigator of the Section 59 panel looking into the allegations of medical aid schemes racially profiling Black and Indian medical practitioners. And as that first phase of the investigation comes in, it appears that that is exactly what has been taking place. So thanks again for updating us, and we'll certainly be getting more information as the respective stages come to finalization on that. Thanks again.